Jaws and claws. Imagine being miles away from shore, sailing through the calm open waters. The sun is high, the horizon endless. Then, suddenly, the entire boat shakes violently. Nobody knows what just happened. You look over the side to see if the boat has struck something, or was it a freak wave? But no, this isn't a freak wave. This is far worse. These are orcas, killer whales. Normally, this would not strike too much of an alarm. But these orcas are different. They're not here to play. They're here for revenge. Since 2020, ships have been increasingly terrorized by a series of calculated, coordinated orca attacks. Boats are left broken, rudders snapped, and in some cases, entire vessels have been sunk to the depths. At the center of this uprising is one name that strikes fear into the hearts of sailors: White Gladis. We will focus today's video on 5 of these increasingly scary attacks. This is the revenge of the orcas. White Gladis is leading an uprising. Killer whales, or orcas, are the undisputed apex predators of the ocean. Their intelligence, social learning, complex communication allow them to hunt in ways that few other animals can rival. But recently, this intelligence has been turned against an unexpected target: human vessels. It all began in the summer of 2020 off the coasts of Spain and Portugal. What started as a few isolated incidents has now become a frighteningly common occurrence. The frequency of these attacks has quickly escalated, with reports flooding in from sailors all across the Iberian Peninsula. Researchers have scrambled to understand what was driving these incidents. Some hypothesized that the orcas were simply playing, while others believe something far more sinister was at play. Orcas, known for their highly social nature and intelligence, could be passing down new behaviors through generations. And in this case, they were passing down the knowledge of how to disable boats. But to what end? It all seems to trace back to one orca, White Gladis. Researchers believe that White Gladis suffered from some sort of traumatic incident, possibly a collision with a boat or entanglement in illegal fishing gear. This critical moment of agony triggered a change in her behavior, a shift that turned her from a curious predator to something far more dangerous. White Gladis is no longer just a hunter, she's a teacher. What began as her own rage-filled strikes against boats has now been passed on to other orcas in her pod. Her tactics are being imitated, spreading through the group as the attacks become more frequent and more deadly. The first major incident took place in July 2020. Victoria Morris, a sailor navigating the Strait of Gibraltar, recalls the terror she felt when her boat was suddenly struck by a powerful force. For over an hour, a group of orcas repeatedly rammed the hull of her boat, zeroing in on the rudder. Each strike was deliberate. The orcas weren't attacking out of playfulness. They were systematically dismantling her vessel on purpose. Initially, she said she did not feel fear because the crew was so busy getting the sails in and readying the life raft in case it was needed. They were also radioing a mayday. Orca attack! Can you imagine this? Being on the sea in deep water, being attacked by killer whales and having to radio in mayday, orca attack. That's the moment fear kicked in, Morris says. And it got even worse when she had to go below deck to prepare a grab bag, the kind of stuff you take when abandoning a ship. Were we really going to have to abandon ship? The thought was unbelievable and the noise was really scary. They were ramming the keel. There was this horrible echo. I thought they could capsize the boat. And this deafening noise as they communicated, whistling to each other. It was so loud that we had to shout. It felt, she says, totally orchestrated. By the time the attack was over, Morris's boat was left without steering, stranded in the middle of the ocean. The crew waited a tense hour and a half for rescue. Perhaps understandably, the Coast Guard took time to comprehend. You're saying you're under attack from orca? To say this is unusual is to massively understate it. The attacks had just begun. This type of call would be considered unusual at the least. By the time help arrived, the orcas were gone. The boat was towed to Barbate, where it was lifted up to reveal the rudder was now missing, along with its bottom third and outer layer, and most menacingly, there were teeth marks along the underside. But that was just the start. Our second story occurred in May 2023, where we saw another chilling encounter. German skipper Werner Schaufelberger was sailing along the Spanish coast when his boat came under attack by White Gladis and her pod. The attack was swifter and more brutal, but what made it even more unnerving was the behavior of the younger Orcas. Schaufelberger watched as the smaller Orcas observed White Gladis's every move. Like students learning from a master, they mimicked her technique. The larger Orca would ram the rudder with full force. The younger ones soon followed, each taking turns to finish the job. The Coast Guard arrived in time to tow the boat, but the vessel was so damaged it sank just as they reached the port. The attack on Schaufelberger's vessel wasn't just a brief encounter. The Orcas were on a mission, continuously circling his boat with what he described as an almost predatory patience. They weren't in a hurry, he recalled. They just kept at it over and over again like they were toying with us. His crew watched in disbelief as the pod, led by White Gladis, took turns ramming the boat. For Schaufelberger, it wasn't just the damage to his vessel that left a mark. It was the terrifying realization that these animals were not attacking out of instinct, but out of intent. One has to ask themselves, were they just intent on damaging the boat, or did they want it to sink so they could exact their revenge on the people on board? Interestingly, just days before Schaufelberger's attack, another sailor, Greg Blackburn, had a close encounter with the same pod. While navigating near Tangier, Blackburn's boat was initially struck by two powerful blows. When he looked over the side, he saw two large Orcas ramming his rudder. Soon, 4 more joined in, led by White Gladis. Blackburn's attempts to stop the attack were futile. They shouted at them and banged on metal objects, but to no avail. The Orcas were relentless, each hit aimed with precision. In a desperate bid to avoid further damage, he dropped his sails, hoping that making the boat less interesting would drive them away. It worked, but not before thousands of dollars in damage had been done. Blackburn was no stranger to rough seas. Nothing could have prepared him for the calculated strikes from the Orcas. It was like watching a well-rehearsed performance, he said. They weren't just attacking, they were communicating, coordinating with one another. The moment White Gladis appeared, it became clear that this was no ordinary encounter. Blackburn attempted evasive maneuvers. The Orcas were faster, more agile, seemingly more determined. For British yachtsman Robert Powell, our 4th sailboat case, the experience was even more terrifying. In 2023, Powell was sailing off the coast of Portugal when his boat became the next target for White Gladis and her pod. It wasn't just one hit, Powell recalls. It was methodical. Each Orca took turns striking the rudder, learning from each other. You could see it in their movements. They weren't playing. They were hunting us. For over 2 hours, Powell and his crew were trapped on their boat, helpless as the Orcas systematically disabled their vessel. The call for the Coast Guard, "Mayday, Mayday," rang out. They were not sure that the boat would hold up to the attack of the Orcas. Their boat was taking on water, and they feared what would happen to them if they had to ditch the boat and go in the water. Was damaging the boat just a way to get to them? They pondered this thought for hours. They prepared for the worst. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the boat was too damaged to be saved. Powell's yacht now lies at the bottom of the Mediterranean, a stark reminder of the danger lurking beneath the waves. What made Powell's experience all the more harrowing was his growing realization that the Orcas were learning. Each hit was harder than the last, Powell remembered. You could almost see them teaching each other how to strike, where to hit. It wasn't just a random attack. They were honing their skills on my boat. Are these Orcas learning new behaviors? In other parts of the world, Orcas are taking on new behaviors as well. They're not just attacking boats. In recent years, these apex predators have taken their hunting skills to the next level. Off the coast of South Africa, 2 notorious Orcas have been killing great white sharks with shocking precision. Using what marine biologists call surgical strikes, the Orcas tear out the liver of their prey, leaving the rest of the body untouched. This methodical hunting behavior has left experts in awe of their intelligence and ability to adapt to new hunting challenges. Could the same level of calculation be behind the recent boat attacks? Marine biologists warn that if White Gladis and her pod have learned how to disable boats, just as other killer whales have learned to take down sharks, then things could possibly get worse, and they're perfecting their methods with each encounter. So what happens when the Coast Guard does not arrive in time? There are people in the water. One of the most alarming attacks that occurred in May 2023, when a Polish yacht was sailing through the Strait of Gibraltar. The Orca attack was fast and fierce. The crew barely had time to react when the pod of Orcas from the White Gladis group slammed into the boat. The attacks were very focused, with each strike aimed at the rudder till it was completely destroyed. Once the rudder was disabled, the boat began to drift aimlessly. The boat was so damaged that it also began to take on water, and the crew could not keep up with the flooding of the craft. The crew was forced to abandon ship, watching in horror as their vessel sank beneath the waves. Luckily for them, they had smaller boats to evacuate to. The incident raised a chilling question. What happens when orcas have moved on from just damaging rudders and aren't just attacking boats, but learning to sink them? If that's the case, these attacks continue, then eventually there will be human casualties. This could lead to very serious implications. As these attacks continue, sailors across the Iberian Peninsula and beyond are being warned to avoid the waters frequented by White Gladis and her pod. There's even a tracking website that shows where the pod is most likely to be. The question remains, are these orcas retaliating for years of environmental damage, overfishing, or habitat destruction? Or are they simply evolving, learning to see boats as just another prey? If this deep dive into the terrifying rise of orca attacks has captivated you, hit like, subscribe, and let us know, what do you think? Are we just in their way, or is something far darker happening beneath the surface?